Welcome everyone to today's Charity Village webinar. My name is Mercedes and I'm the Marketing and Communications Manager with Charity Village. As we are gathering here on a virtual platform, it is important to acknowledge that each of us is joining this webinar from the ancestral or unceded lands of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nation people. As a settler on this land, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Anishinaabe, which includes the Ojibwe of Fort William First Nation. Please join us in a moment of reflection as we recognize the Indigenous peoples as the stewards of this land. Let's acknowledge the mistakes and harm in our history and the ongoing injustices, and contemplate tangible actions each of us can take to move forward in a spirit of truth, reconciliation, and collaboration. For those who may be joining a Charity Village webinar for the first time, Charity Village is Canada's largest online job board for the nonprofit sector. In addition to our online job board, organizations can also post volunteer positions. So if you are looking for work or to recruit talent in the sector, Charity Village is a great place to start. We also have a ton of excellent resources for nonprofit professionals, including online courses, articles, fundraising tools, and free webinars like the one we are presenting today. Before we start today's webinar, I would like to quickly run through some housekeeping items. You may have noticed when you joined the webinar that you were automatically put on mute. Since we have hundreds of participants in today's session, it is important for us to minimize the amount of background noise so that everyone can clearly hear the presentation. But you can still ask questions and make comments using the question box at the bottom of the Zoom control panel. Look for that at the bottom of your screen. You can also email your questions to webinars@charityvillage.com. We will be taking questions at the end of the webinar, so please submit your questions as you think of them, and we will do our best to get to as many as possible. If you happen to encounter any technical issues with the webinar, whether with viewing the presentation or with the audio, please let us know in the question box or by sending us an email. We will do our best to get any technical difficulties resolved as quickly as possible, but in a worst-case scenario, please remember that we are recording today's webinar, and we will send you the full recording by email tomorrow. So if you get called away or disconnected, you will still be able to view the full presentation. And with that, I would like to welcome our presenters for today, Rochelle Greaves and Roxanne Tacky, the co-founders of StoryPoint Consulting. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Mercedes. We're really happy to welcome everyone to our session this afternoon, Fundraising Basics for Small Nonprofits, How to Make Your Grant Search More Effective. As Mercedes mentioned, there will be a question and answer period at the end of our session today. If you have a question while we're presenting, please feel free to submit it using the Q&A feature. Also, if time runs out and we're unable to get to your question, feel free to include your email address with your question and we'll respond to you that way. Just to give you a quick background about us, Roxanne and I are sisters, and we work primarily with small and medium-sized nonprofits and charities. And we help staff and volunteers find the right donors, effectively communicate with supporters, and strengthen relationships with them so they can generate the needed funds to achieve their mission. And our approach to fundraising is simple and practical, and we really strive to create solutions for organizations that are not only within their capacity, but that they can implement immediately. Before we start today, we would like to first acknowledge that Roxanne is located in Manitoba on Treaty 1 land, and I'm in Southern Ontario, where the land is covered by the Williams Treaties. We recognize that these are the lands First Nations people called home before the arrival of settlers, and still do call this land home. Indigenous peoples continue to contribute to our country's history through culture, heritage, philanthropy, and innovation. We acknowledge that we've benefited from colonialism and have an honest desire to work in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration, both now and in the future. So today, while we do touch on some tips for how to find grants, that's not the focus of today's session. Our goal is to help you better understand the grant writing process so your search for grants is more effective. In our session today, we'll provide an overview of the grant writing process so you can better understand how to prepare for your grant search more efficiently. We're going to discuss how to interpret the eligibility of grant funders. We'll share how to find the best and most appropriate funding opportunities for your organization. And finally, we'll talk about how to make your grant search more efficient so you can reduce the amount of research time required identifying grants. Now, perhaps you're new to grant writing, so we're going to start with an overview of the grant writing process so you can better understand how to prepare your grant search more efficiently. We'll start with identifying what your organization's funding needs are, defining your goals with a budget, and finding potential funders that align with those goals. Now, it might seem obvious to start by identifying your organization's needs, but in our experience, many organizations often skip this step unintentionally and in turn end up pursuing funding opportunities that are not a great fit for their organization. For example, have any of you had an experienced member of your team emailing you about a grant opportunity with the message, "We should apply for this, it's due next week," and then the scrambling begins? And even if you're able to meet the deadline and get an application in, you may be left wondering if it was really a quality grant application. So the first step in making your grant search more effective is to have a clear understanding of how grants can support your cause. When identifying your organization's needs, some questions you might consider are: how could additional funding support your mission? For example, could your organization benefit from help with program development? Or perhaps you've outgrown your current space and need a larger building. Another question to consider is, in what areas are your team of staff and volunteers struggling, and where could they use additional resources? For example, it's very common that organizations need more staff capacity, or perhaps you need equipment or software to make your team function more efficiently. Or you may also consider, how can being awarded a grant positively impact your organization's reputation? Most funders publicly share the names of their grant recipients. So being awarded a high-profile grant can actually help raise the awareness of your cause and help secure more grant funding or even private donations, which can help support the long-term sustainability of your organization. Now, the good news is, regardless of what your needs are, there's likely a grant to help you. But before you move directly to the step of searching for grants, it's important to first understand the costs associated with your goal. To effectively pursue grant funding, the next step in the grant writing process is to estimate the cost involved for your project or initiative and create a budget. This budget will allow you to determine the amount of funding you need so that you can establish a dollar amount as a goal and find the best suited funding opportunity for your organization. To better understand this process, let's use a concrete example. Now, let's say your organization has decided that one of your primary struggles is public relations and outreach. You don't have a marketing person on staff, and currently your executive director is overseeing all of your outreach activities. And while the executive director is trying their best, marketing isn't their area of expertise. So you'd like to bring on a marketing consultant to create an outreach plan with defined tasks that staff can incorporate into their existing processes. You research what marketing consulting fees might cost, and you decide you'll need $10,000 to make the project work. This information is helpful enough to guide your grant search. Now, your organization may have several goals like these with an associated budget, where grant funding can help improve your work. And while there are grants available to assist you with most of these goals, pursuing multiple goals at once may not make your grant search efficient. Like the photo in this slide, you cannot do everything at once. So, a good strategy to increase the efficiency of your grant research is to prioritize your goals according to what is most important for your organization's work. This will help you share the priorities with your team so they can also help look for grant opportunities that align with your goals. Now, once you have a good sense of your organization's funding needs and you've estimated the costs involved, you can move to the third step in the grant writing process, which is to research potential funders. To do this effectively, you must be able to understand the language grant funders use so you can interpret whether your organization is eligible for funding. Now, unlike what it looks like in the photo, figuring out the funder's eligibility doesn't have to be confusing. While this may sound obvious, one of the main reasons that grant applications are declined is because the goal the grant seeker shared on the application doesn't align with the goals of the funder. While you're doing your research, take the time to confirm that your project is within the funder's area of support, as this is important to ensure that staff and volunteer time is not wasted on a proposal that's not likely to be successful. So to help you with your search, let's discuss some of the common eligibility requirements that grant funders have. The first eligibility requirement is organization type. Now, some funders only disperse grants to certain types of organizations. For example, some grants are only for organizations that are registered charities, whereas other funders make grants to registered nonprofits, grassroots organizations, groups of citizens, or even municipalities. It's important to ensure that your organization type matches what the funder is looking for, as this tends to be a hard rule that the funder will typically not budge from. To ensure your organization type is eligible for a particular grant funder, find out if you require charitable status or incorporation to apply, and check if the grant funder is focused on specific areas of support and whether your mission statement aligns with the funder's goals. For example, if the funder is interested in supporting environmental organizations and yours focuses on relief of poverty, it would not be a fit for funding. The next eligibility requirement to watch for is the project type. Examples of project types include grants that support organizational development, like training, professional development, or operational efficiency, capital grants that support renovations or purchases of buildings or land, or operational grants that tend to be more flexible and support activities such as paying ongoing rental fees. It's important that you're aware of the types of initiatives the funder is interested in supporting before submitting a grant proposal. Referring back to the example where the organization is seeking $10,000 to hire a marketing consultant, this project goal is aimed at increasing organizational efficiency. Therefore, it would be appropriate to seek grants in cases where the project type supports organizational development. Another type of eligibility requirement is geographic restriction. A funder may be focused on a particular area, such as a city or town, or they may provide funding to a broader region, such as national grants across Canada. So always ensure your organization is in the eligible region for funding before applying. Now, many funders have a mission to direct funds to a specific demographic community as an eligibility requirement, such as only funding seniors programs. Also, in many cases, grants will fund organizations that are led by particular communities, such as focusing on Indigenous-led organizations. And different funders will often define the community groups they focus on in different ways. So never assume your understanding of a certain community matches what the funder is looking to support. For example, funders who focus on supporting community members living with disabilities will often have different goals on how they want to support this community. Some funders may be specifically focused on serving people living with physical disabilities, while other funders are interested in supporting people living with addiction as part of their strategy to serve individuals living with disabilities. So for this reason, always check in with the funder to understand which groups their definition includes to see if you're eligible. Another important eligibility requirement is the funding amount specified by the funder. Returning to our earlier example of seeking a $10,000 grant for a marketing consultant, there are two strategies your organization can pursue to fund the project. You can try to find one grant that will fund the full $10,000, or find two or more grants that will jointly fund the $10,000 goal. Although a funder may specify that they provide grants up to a certain amount, it's still a good idea to check what their typical grant amount is. For example, a grant may advertise eligible funding up to $50,000, but upon doing research, you may find that most organizations typically receive $20,000. And often funders will publicly share their recent grants on their websites, along with details about what they supported. This information can give you a good idea of the typical grant amount for a project similar to yours. Again, although it may seem obvious, many organizations are declined for a grant because they asked a funder for more than the maximum grant amount, so pay close attention to what the grant criteria states. Another consideration when interpreting grant eligibility is the term or the length of time the funding is offered. Some grants provide multi-year funding, typically for 2 to 5 year terms. These grants are beneficial for organizations that need to fund long-term initiatives and require reliable funding for several years to pursue the project. For example, a program where the organization needs a specialized staff person leading the initiative may need to guarantee their salary for several years to retain the best and the brightest talent. One-time grants are short-term, and once the money is spent, the funder will not renew the grant. Typically, the money must be spent down within 1 or 2 years, depending on the funder's grant agreement. And one-time funding can be beneficial for new initiatives or unexpected costs, such as replacing equipment for a program or purchasing upgraded technology. An important note here is that while multi-year grants are often more desirable because of the consistency they provide, they often require more administrative resources in terms of grant management. These grants generally require annual reporting back to the funder and a system to keep track of the funds as they are spent. So, for organizations with staff and volunteers that are less experienced with grant management, you must be prepared to meet these requirements if you're approved for multi-year grants. So, it's worth considering whether you have the resources to manage this type of grant before applying for funding. Now, once your organization has a firm grasp on its objectives, and an understanding of how to interpret grant eligibility, it's much easier to find grants that are well aligned with your organization's goals. To find grants that are the best fit, your organization should reflect on who you have as part of your team and what your needs are. For example, do you have people with significant grant writing experience? Would you prefer to work with funders who can offer more support in the grant writing process? Or do you need accommodations such as support for staff or volunteers with English as a second language? Regardless of what your needs are, there's likely a grant funder who can meet those needs. So let's review some common grant funder processes and how each can impact the suitability or fit for your organization. Understanding the various processes grant funders use can significantly impact your organization's success in securing funding. We'll explore 4 key considerations for finding the right grant for your organization: open versus closed grants, national versus local grants, trust-based versus traditional grants, and fixed deadlines versus grants with rolling submissions. So let's examine each of these processes used by grant funders to find the best fit for your organization and help you tailor your grant search. The first grant process to consider when finding a fit for your organization is the open versus closed grant process. Some funders have a closed or invitation-only grant process. Therefore, they don't respond regularly to unsolicited grant proposals. Meanwhile, others have an open grant process or regular intake periods where they accept new applications either at specific intervals or year-round. Applying for an invitation-only grant program likely means that the funder has vetted your organization and has already determined that you are likely eligible. It typically requires organizations to have formed some type of relationship with a funder or submitting a letter of inquiry with an overview of why you're seeking funding. When applying for an open grant process, it's important that your organization understand the eligibility requirements, like those we discussed earlier, such as organization or project type, because the funder will likely let you submit your application, whether it's a good fit or not. And applications that are not eligible or strong will be declined or rejected automatically, which can cause a lot of wasted time and effort on an application. The next grant process to consider when finding a fit for your organization is national versus local grants. Grants that accept applications from organizations across Canada are typically more competitive. If your organization is small and lacks grant writing experience, your application may be considered alongside other national organizations with in-house grant writing expertise. Now, that doesn't mean your organization shouldn't apply, but you should consider whether you have the time to submit a strong application. National grants also come with additional considerations. For example, large federal grant programs often involve time-intensive applications and rigorous reporting requirements after approval. In contrast, local grants tend to be less competitive as there are fewer organizations within a specific geographic region compared to the entire country. Local grant funders often provide additional services to support grant applicants. And since most community foundations focus on a specific geographic area, they are more open to forming relationships with the organizations they fund. Also, they may offer additional support during the grant writing process, such as information sessions and meetings with staff. So, if your organization is volunteer run or lacks significant capacity to manage a grant, local grants may be a more suitable fit for your team. Another important grant process to consider when finding a fit for your organization is trust-based versus traditional grant processes. The term trust-based philanthropy is one that's become more prevalent since the year 2020 to grant makers. Many funders are now interested in shifting the balance of power from grant funders back to the nonprofit and charitable sector. As such, some grants are based on trust-based principles, such as reducing the administrative burden of the application process and providing a more collaborative approach focused on learning and improving for both the funder and the grant recipient. Choosing to apply to funders that take a trust-based approach will often require more time and dedication towards relationship building, as the funder will likely be interested in learning more about how the grant had an impact on your work and the community you serve. In contrast, choosing a funder with a traditional approach may require more adherence to rules and regulations, particularly after receiving the funding. And the last process we'll discuss when finding a fit for your organization is a deadline-based grant versus one with a rolling submission. Some grants have a set deadline, and generally that's a hard deadline, and late applications will not be accepted. Most funders use some type of portal or online application, so if you attempt to submit late, the technology will simply not allow it. It's very important to ensure you have the necessary time and resources to submit your application on time for these grants. For grants with a rolling application, You may submit at any point during the funding cycle. However, it's important to find out if the funder provides grants until a funding budget has been exhausted. If so, it's more beneficial for your organization to get your application in early in the cycle. If we refer back to our example, where an organization is seeking $10,000 to hire a marketing consultant, we found two funders with grant programs that align with this goal. One is a private foundation, and the other is a federal government grant program. While the private foundation is local, the government grant is a national program where our organization will have to compete with many other organizations for funding. This may influence which one we prefer to apply for. So understanding these funders' grant processes helps make your grant search more effective.
So now that we have considered the processes of most funders and have determined who your top suitable funders are based on your team's goals and resources, it's time to start the grant search. And there are tools and strategies available that can help you minimize the research time necessary to find the most well-aligned grants for your organization's goals. The first is using grant databases. There are subscription-based grant databases, such as Imagine Canada's Grant Connect, that include a list of funders and key information about what they fund. Additionally, all levels of government offer databases to search for grant opportunities. To reduce research time, use advanced search features to filter opportunities based on your geographic area, the funding range you are interested in, and your project type or focus area. This is why taking the time to define your organization's need and project budget is so important. This step is truly integral in helping your organization find a suitable funder and significantly reduce your research time. In addition, networking can help your organization find suitable grant funding, particularly funders that support your organization's area of work. Some examples of networks that can help you find grants are industry associations or membership organizations that often share news with their members about upcoming funding opportunities. Also, industry publications, websites, and social media feeds may also share this information. Additionally, if you are connected with peers within your sector on social media or the web, they will often publicly recognize grants they were awarded, which may be suitable for your organization as well. If your organization has had past success with a funder, that is also a great place to start when seeking new funding. If you are able, work to develop good relationships with past funders and funders you have active grants with. By letting them know about your goals and funding needs, they may proactively share information about suitable funding opportunities they have available that your organization may be eligible for. Now, while the relationship building process does take time, it's well worth the investment, and it can significantly reduce your time searching for grants in the future. In addition, ensure you sign up to newsletters of funders whose grants you've received in the past, as they will generally share information about upcoming funding opportunities, which will also help reduce your search time. Now, if you're like me, when I'm searching for things, I tend to use Google, but Googling something can open up endless possibilities that will make your grant search lengthy. So to reduce your research time, try setting up Google alerts for keywords that relate to your grant search. So for example, If you work for a climate change nonprofit, you can consider a Google alert like environmental grants. Also, follow hashtags on social media related to your grant search, such as hashtag nonprofit grant. Also, AI language learning models like ChatGPT and Microsoft Copilot can go a long way to helping you save time in your grant search. They can help you scan the web for available grants when provided with good prompts about your funding goals, budget, and area of work. A few considerations with these models are to avoid inputting any personal information, as any personal data is not secure. In addition, while they may be helpful to get you started in your grant search, remember that these models scan the internet to create answers, so the information they return may not be accurate. Always check your sources and consider an AI-generated answer sort of like a personal assistant making a suggestion that you'll likely need to look into further. Staying organized can go a long way in making your grant search effective, and it's essential to have a system to keep track of deadlines and application requirements. This becomes particularly important when applying for multiple grants, and especially when you need several grants to fund one initiative. So if I go back to our earlier example, Rochelle mentioned of seeking $10,000 to hire a marketing consultant. Let's say we need to apply for 2 grants to fund this project. It's best to have a centralized system to manage both applications and ensure they are both submitted on time. In many cases, different grants have different requirements, such as eligible costs. So to stay organized, you'll need a system to keep track of the requirements so you will have the best chance of submitting a strong application on time. Also, tracking deadlines can help you decide which grants are best suited for your organization. For example, if a grant deadline is in the middle of what will be a busy period for your team, it may not be the best suited opportunity to apply for. So taking the time to track deadlines early on will ensure your team uses its time most efficiently. Another aspect that can help you improve the effectiveness of your grant search is participating in training opportunities like today's webinar. Training is a great way to learn best practices and stay current with technology that can help you with your grant search. Even as you gain experience with the grant writing process, continuing to seek training opportunities can help you become even more effective in your grant search. So using effective strategies like the ones that we've shared today for your search does lead to better use of your staff time by clearly defining your goals, drafting a budget, and understanding which funders are a best fit for your organization. You can identify which grants best align with your mission and your goals, and avoid wasting time applying for grants that are not suitable. Taking the time to prepare will ensure all your hard work pays off by following the grant requirements to maximize your chances of success. Now, even when we take all the necessary steps of defining the goals, determining eligibility, and finding a grant that is a good fit, it's important to be prepared for the possibility of rejection. And handling rejection effectively can be a great learning opportunity that helps your organization strengthen future grant applications and improve your chances for future funding. So here are some strategies to help you appropriately deal with a declined grant. First, request feedback from your funder. Reaching out to the funder can be a crucial step that your organization can take to increase the likelihood of crafting a successful proposal in the future. By expressing gratitude for their consideration of your application, you not only start to build a relationship with the funder, but you also display a proactive attitude. And furthermore, seeking clarity on the grant requirements is a valuable strategy because it allows you to understand exactly what the funder is looking for and helps you to tailor your grant proposal to meet these specific requirements in the future. This feedback can guide your future grant writing efforts, helping you refine and improve, and thus enhancing your chances of securing a grant in the future. Next, try to learn from the funder's feedback. If a funder has taken the time to provide constructive feedback on your application, use this as an opportunity to learn and improve your grant writing for future proposals and applications. After receiving feedback from the funder, take the opportunity to review your application objectively and try to strengthen your next grant application. And finally, use the strategies we've provided today to explore other sources of funding. Just keep on applying because successful fundraisers are persistent and do not give up easily. It's important to keep trying also because receiving a decline on your grant application does not necessarily mean that that funder will never contribute to your project. Even if your grant application does get rejected, view it as a learning opportunity for your organization. Keep applying, and you will eventually secure grants successfully. While grant writing can be challenging, we hope that the strategies we've presented today will help you find the best, most suitable grants for your organization. And before we end the presentation, we'd just like to leave you with some additional tips for successful grant applications so that each of your organizations can continue to fund your amazing initiatives. The first tip is, and this is one of the most important parts of successful grant writing, is to ensure that the funder's priorities align with your organization's work. If you are able to, try to have a conversation with somebody that works at the funder's office to further clarify your alignment with their grant program. This will help ensure that your organization's goals are a good fit with the funder's priorities, and if not, you can pursue a better grant opportunity. The second tip, which builds on the previous point of clarifying alignment, is to avoid applying for opportunities that are not the right fit. We've talked at length today about the preparation that needs to be done prior to searching for grants, and especially for smaller organizations that may not have the resources and capacity, it's important to target the right opportunities. This focused approach of targeting the right grant opportunities will help ensure your efforts are effective and yield better results. The next tip is to engage your team in the grant writing process. So for activities such as budgeting or project planning, because this will really help to lighten the load on the person who's responsible for the grant writing. You can also share your goals with your board and staff and other key volunteers so they can help you find the right opportunities, preventing those "we should apply for this" emails from your team members. This collaborative approach ensures everyone understands the goals of the organization and is working together towards creating successful grant applications. And our last tip is to thank your funder. Regardless of the amount of a grant you're approved for, we always recommend that you thank your funder. And remember that if you're approved for a grant, that funder has become one of your donors. So saying thank you is a simple and free action that goes a long way in developing a stronger relationship with your funder. And once you've completed the deliverables of your project, ensure you follow up with some type of report outlining the successes and even the challenges of your project. This will go a long way towards increasing the chances that the funder will support you again in the future. So this brings us to the end of the presentation, and we're hoping you've heard a few things that you're able to implement immediately after today's session. And if you're a small or medium-sized organization and you're looking for resources to help you with your fundraising, we encourage you to head over to our website and check out our free resources. We also have a section called Short Stories, where we have articles and podcast episodes with fundraising tips and advice for nonprofits and charities, including many that are specific to grants and grant writing. So at this time, we will answer any questions that we've got in the Q&A box.
So Rox, I'll read them and I'll probably make you answer all of them.
No problem.
So the first one is, can you please clarify the charity versus nonprofit versus society versus qualified donee versus intermediary? Thank you.
I can. Okay, so there's we've got a lot of jargon in the sector. Essentially, there are two categories that are determined by the CRA, the Canada Revenue Agency, for tax purposes. There are qualified donees, and qualified donees include charities. There are also other categories of qualified donees defined by the CRA. You can find the specific list on their website, but they're organizations such as, I think, news organizations, some sport organizations, municipalities are examples of other qualified donees. And those are the organizations that can issue tax receipts. And so when you find a funder who says we are supporting only charities and qualified donees, they're looking at those categories of organizations. A non-qualified donee is everyone else. I am a non-qualified donee. A registered nonprofit is a non-qualified donee. So would be a society or another grassroots organization. So it's essentially any organization that is not a registered charity or qualified donee for tax purposes. But there are many grant opportunities available for registered nonprofits who are not registered charities. And there are even, as we mentioned, grant opportunities available for groups of citizens, grassroots organizations. So it's just important to look to see what the funder specifies for eligibility.
Okay, the next one is, how can a newly established nonprofit secure their first grant if they lack the experience to submit a proposal for an operational grant? Where can they get help, and where can they find small grants that are easy to apply for and don't require much paperwork?
That's a good question. So first of all, congratulations on establishment of your new nonprofit. And so we would suggest starting locally. Start locally by trying to find out if you have a local community foundation. I would make connections with your local elected officials. So your city councilor, your MLA, your MP, because they can connect you with government funding. They also tend to be connected to what's happening in the community. So start to form those relationships to find out where you can find some grant funding. We also talked about making connections with other networks. I'm not sure the specific sector you're working in, but if, for example, you were environmental organizations, make connections with other environmental organizations in your region. And try to start local, because some of those local funders and some of those smaller grant programs often have more capacity to help support you in your grant writing if you lack the experience. In terms of finding operational funding, that is certainly a challenge. There tend to be more project-based grant opportunities than operational funding opportunities. However, by making those connections and finding out what there might be available, that's a good start to try to find what opportunities there are.
Okay, do you know of any grant tracking software out there that might be free or at a small cost, looking for something to replace Excel?
That's a good question. We actually do not endorse or recommend any particular tracking software.
Okay, and do you recommend any of the grant finding database resources? We've subscribed and been disappointed with some resources to date.
Mm-hmm. The only one that we tend to recommend and endorse is the one we mentioned today, which is Imagine Canada's Grant Connect, just because because of Grant Connect, because of Imagine Canada's connection to the sector, and also because through many local libraries, often you can try it for free without having to subscribe. There's no other ones that we typically tend to endorse.
If your organization is a small national charity, can it apply for local grants?
That's a good question. So that depends on the specific funder's eligibility. Some local grant funders, you have to check with their eligibility, but many will say that if you're a national charity, you can apply if you have a local presence. Now you have to find out from the funder what the local presence means. Sometimes that means they'd like you to have a local office, local staff, but others will be, you would be eligible to apply for if you just have local programs within their particular region. So it's important to sort of check in with the funder and clarify, but being a national charity does not necessarily mean you can't apply for something local. I would first, I would first look for local grants where you're running programs and services, and then see if you're eligible still being national.
What is a suitable time frame to follow up on grant applications?
Okay, so I am not sure if you mean following up after you've submitted or following up after you've received a decision. So in terms of if you've submitted a grant application, we don't generally recommend following up after submission because typically, even if it's a smaller grant program, there's still going to be some level of competition, and the funder tends to be quite busy in that period after the submission deadline has closed. So you're probably not going to be in a good position to receive a response at that time. And also some funders may follow up with you for additional information at that time. So if they have questions for you, they're likely to reach out. Once you've received a decision, I would follow up right away. So for example, if you received a decision and unfortunately your grant was declined, I would follow up right away to ask if you can have a meeting to discuss, why the decline or a little bit more rationale or information. Or as I mentioned before, if you received a approval, I would follow up right away to thank the funder to form that relationship.
With the backslide in DEI, are you seeing the grants and funding for BIPOC communities reduced? Welcome your insights as a fellow Black female in the nonprofit sector.
So I believe that there's, in Canada, particularly with the community foundations, there's still quite a focus on diversity, equity, inclusion. I wouldn't necessarily say that we're seeing a backslide. I would still say that depending on the funder's goals and alignment, there's still quite a presence for support of many communities that have not equitably received grant funding in the past. So certainly the community foundations, I think, have been leading the charge with that. So if you are living in a region that has a community foundation, I would check in with them.
Can you give some suggestions for things to do to build a relationship with a funder without being a pest?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, first of all, I would encourage you not to think of yourself as being a pest, because I know sometimes as being in this sector, you feel like sharing your needs is pestering, but Rochelle and I always talk about fundraising as being much more gentle than this, because if you have a valuable cause, which I'm sure you do, sharing with people who are interested in supporting that cause is actually making a valuable connection. So as long as you feel confident that you're aligned with that funder, then you should feel confident reaching out and to talk about what your goals are that align with that funder. And if you've been successful with that funder, once it's time to report on the deliverables, that's another good time to talk about how your project went and what future goals you have. So, and also typically funders like getting invitations to things like your annual general meeting. If you have another general annual report, they typically like getting that information. So just looping them in on things you already do with your normal communications is another good way to invite them to sort of engage how much they would like to engage without feeling like you're being a pest.
And this is the last question we can take today. How many hours do you think someone should allot to writing a large national grant application? Rough estimate.
Boy, that's a difficult question. It sort of it depends. I know I've said it depends a few times. It really does depend on the application and how much legwork you've done. If you do a lot of the work, if you do a good job with the work in the beginning, like you're very clear on what your goal is, what your budget is, what the need is for what you're doing, and how you can contribute to that problem and help solve that problem. If you've done all that legwork, you're in a much better position to put in sort of less time on the application because you're clear on your goals than another organization that believes they align, but they haven't done that work. So I would just recommend putting the time in on development of the goal, development of that budget, and you will find that will significantly reduce the amount of time that you need to actually spend with the grant writing.
Thank you very much for presenting such an informative webinar. Do you happen to have any final comments before we sign off today?
I would just say, when Rochelle and I do a lot of on the topic of grant writing, and we know that grant writing does take a lot of time and research, and we just want to encourage you, because I know that all of the organizations out there today, I'm sure you're all working in really wonderful causes. We want to encourage you and let you know there is grant funding out there to support you, and just take your time to try to find the best possible and best suited opportunities. And we wish you the best of luck in your grant writing endeavors.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I just wanted to remind everyone that you will receive a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to the webinar recording. Please feel free to share this link with your colleagues. The email will also include a survey link that you can fill out with your feedback on today's webinar. You should see a survey link pop up right here in Zoom following the session as well. On behalf of Charity Village, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you'll join us for our next free webinar, Key Financial Metrics Every Nonprofit Should Track for Long-Term Success. You can find more information on this and all of our upcoming webinars at charityvillage.com/webinars. Thanks again for joining us. I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.